Okay, well, welcome everyone to our final installment of Unlocking English Learners Potential book study. I'm Alec Johnson. I'm the president of the Kentucky Coalition for English Learners. It's really great to have all of you back. I want to take a quick moment to thank the Kentucky Department of Ed and to thank our coalition member presenter, Allison, for this fantastic series. We've been happy to partner on with the Department of Education, and thanks to all of you for joining us again. Allison, looks like we have a smaller group. I think people have senioritis or spring fever. I don't know what we call it, but it's nice out and
That's right.
putting on the shorts and getting outside, I guess. But we're happy to have those of you who could join today. If you have missed any sessions, Cayman has been sending out updates with links to all the past presentations. So please take the opportunity to go back and look at those. And I will be quiet and let Allison take over. I'll keep
All
letting
right.
folks in as they join.
All right. Thank you so much, Alec. And like you said, thanks so much. I'm excited that this is our final session as we've been looking at the book, Unlocking English Learner Potential. So welcome. We're going to finish it up today, talk about formative assessment. Our objectives for today's session. First, we will share a strategy for activating background knowledge that we used since the last session. We are going to discuss current research related to formative assessments and English learners. We will examine recommendations and strategies for assessing EL students. And then at the end, we're going to spend a little bit of time recapping our time together for the whole book study, and we're going to write and share a short elevator speech for teaching English learners. All right, so last session, we spent time thinking about building background knowledge with our students. And in just a minute, we're going to kind of combine our share out, our first breakout group with the beginning discussion of our new chapter for today. So I'm going to read the slide, but then we're going to come back to it in just a minute. So like in previous sessions, you're going to have a chance to share a strategy that you used in your teaching since the last session related to building background knowledge. And in your group, you might share how, if it was impactful, how, or any future plans that you have to develop background knowledge, activate background knowledge with your students. And you can always, if you got your book with you, you can always look back to chapter 7 if you need to. So again, we're going to do that in just a minute. All right, the new chapter for today that I hope you are able to preview at least a little bit is chapter 9 on formative assessments. Right? Anybody else like a red pen? All right. If you want to go ahead and get your book out, we are going to be underlining, highlighting some things in the text. So please go ahead and grab your book. This chapter starts on page 229. Give you a second to grab that. And I really appreciated this quote from the introduction. It says, in this chapter, we examine formative assessment for teachers of English learners as an example of assessment for learning, and that it holds the promise of empowering teachers to design, implement, and integrate assessments that are valid and reliable, and most importantly, provide valuable information to inform instructions of ELs. I hope that just really stuck out to me, because the whole reason that we are spending our time thinking about formative assessment is so that we can impact future instruction of our English learners. So our focus today is going to be on designing formative assessments that are just that are valid and reliable and helpful for planning future lessons. So if you wouldn't mind to go ahead and turn in your book to page 232. As we get ready for our first breakout session, I've lifted some quotes from the research section of the chapter. So I'm going to ask you to highlight those, and you will use those when you get to your breakout room to kind of discuss. So the first one is on page 232. It's kind of in the middle of the page, and it starts with research. It says, research has clearly demonstrated that summative assessments designed mainly for native English speakers may not be as reliable and valid for English learners. So if you want to find that one, you can underline that. The second quote was also on page 232. The last paragraph says, if assessment is reliable, valid, and fair for ELs from start to finish, then it can serve as the bridge to educational equity. I'll give you a second to find that one. All right, and then if you look at the next page on page 233, this is in the first paragraph. First complete paragraph there. It says, all teachers of ELs are teachers of academic language, and all teachers should also assess EL's academic language. And then the last quote is on the bottom of page 233. It's the beginning of the first paragraph under that last heading. The ultimate benefit of using formative assessment for ELs is that it provides teachers with ongoing insights into students' learning and supports teachers in adjusting their instruction. Give you a second to find that one. Okay, so we are coming, let's see how many. Okay, so we might be able to have 3 groups, Alec, 3 or 4 groups. So in your first group time, you're going to share out a strategy from chapter 7, or one that, if you didn't have a chance to use one that you thought was meaningful or that you thought you might use with students. And then we're gonna discuss those research bullets that we just underlined in the chapter. And again, they're on page 232 to 233. We're going to take about 15 minutes. And if something else stood out to you, if you, as you were reading the chapter in the research section, those were some lines that I lifted. But of course, if there was another part that was super meaningful, please share that in your group as well. So you have 2 jobs in your first breakout time. Are there any questions about what to do?
Okay, here we go to breakouts.
Thank you. Yep, good. All right, I think that most people are back. I hope that that was some meaningful conversation around the research on formative assessment, and then also sharing a little bit about what we learned last time. Hope you still have your book. So we're going to go ahead and go to page 234. There is a figure at the top of page 234 that explains their 3-step process for formative assessments. The slide and also that figure show a circle. I really like that. So the first step was articulate. We're going to state the goals. What is the success criteria? What are the content and language objectives for the students? What are we teaching? What do we want them to know and be able to do? And then that leads to number 2, where we elicit evidence about English learners, about their learning. So that's actually the task, whatever it is that day, to go along with the learning, that formative assessment. Further in the chapter, we're going to look at different strategies and different formats for those formative assessments. But then once you do the assessment, it leads right to number 3, that circle, where you have to take the evidence and use it to inform ongoing instruction. So again, the whole focus of this chapter is on that formative assessment cycle, not the large scale summative assessments like access and state testing. So we're going to look at how can we make these assessments that guide our instruction more valid, reliable, and just successful for our English learners. So I'd like you to look at page 236. Figure 9.4 is a really long checklist. And it is actually divided by proficiency level. So you can look across the top and see that. And I'd like for you to think of a specific EL student in your classroom. Is that student a beginning level student, intermediate, or advanced? And then take a look at that checklist and maybe choose a formative assessment that you think would be appropriate or that this student might have success with. So I'm going to give you a minute to look at those, think about a student, and then pick one or two that you think might be successful or one that you have had success with in the past. And then in just a second, we're going to put a couple ideas or things that in the chat. All right, so whenever you're ready, if you have thought about a student and looked at those choices, or maybe another one that you wanted to share in the chat, we'll call out some of those. Yeah. Thank you, Samantha. Yeah, word walls and sentence stems can be very effective. For beginning level students, those sentence frames, just helping them get started and focus on the content, setting up the language, word walls and word banks. Awesome. Picture frames. Using pictures, matching words, modeling to facilitate learning, word walls. A lot of this sounds a lot like what we talked about in our scaffolding chapter, right? Ways that we can make things more visual and just lessen that language load while still addressing content. Yeah, using the home language of students, that's wonderful. Thank you. Word walls, word banks, especially with vocabulary content. Awesome. All right, thank you for sharing those. All right, if you look over at the top of the next page, we're going to think about, that was a pretty nice list, but there might be some other types of formative assessments that you've used in your classroom. So if you wouldn't mind to start making a list somewhere in your notebook, or you can, I like that this book has a lot of table and a lot of space to actually write in. So you could look at the list that's on page 237 and then maybe add some others that you do. And then the publishers of this book also have an online resource. It's a great website too. I should put that at the end too, the Support Ed. So they shared this infographic that actually it's a choice board of formative assessments. So if you want to take a look at that too. This is, I'll put a link to the presentation, and I know Cayman sends them out, but that is that top, the title here is actually linked to this choice board. This one is relating to story elements or something that you might use. To me, it looks like more elementary, but you could use it for fiction stories at an upper level also. If you'd like to look at some of those ideas for formative assessments, I felt like that was a really nice way to see a variety of assessments that you can use. As you read those, you might notice that, some require speaking, some require no speaking at all, where you're moving pictures around. Some you have to write, some you have to talk, some you get to draw. So that also could be a resource for you to look back at when you're done. All right. Would anyone like more time looking at those formative assessments, or do we want to keep moving? I see some head nods. There we go. Okay. So the last part of the chapter really discussed how we can ensure the validity of assessment with English learners. They defined validity as the extent to which an assessment accurately measures what it is supposed to measure. And this is on page 238. Their first example, you can see the picture of the mop is right there, they showed a picture of a mop, but the task was actually having to do with word parts and sounds, where the student was asked to figure out a word that ends the same as the picture shown. So you can see how if you didn't know the word for mop, you're really not assessing letters and sounds or word parts, right? It becomes more of a vocabulary task if you don't know the word for mop, which again might be a tricky concept or vocabulary word for English learners. Yesterday, in my newcomer group of kindergartners, we often sort pictures, and we were working with identifying beginning sounds for the letters R and J. Okay, so I have a whole bunch of cards. Usually what I do is I show them all of the cards first, and then and name them so that they know that vocabulary word. But if you could imagine, so we were doing, the sounds were and J for R and J. So if when I hold up this picture, because I blurred my background, I don't think you can see it now. It's a picture of a Jeep. So newcomer, kindergartner, when they see this picture, they all said car, right? So while we know this is the more specific, there we go, maybe you can see it a little bit. This is the more specific word, a picture of a Jeep, right? They knew the word car. So I just think that's something that we really want to be careful of. Here's another one. This is a picture of a jet, right? That's what we were sorting for, that J, when you have those phonics, phonics cards that come, but they're going to look at this and they're going to say plane, because that's the more simple word, right? So we think of pictures as being a scaffold, but sometimes they can create confusion, and then we're not really assessing the task of those sounds, right? All of them could make that. We use this alphabet chart every day. They can go rabbit, right? They know that sound, but we just want to make sure that we are thinking about what we're asking them to do and what else they may need to know in order to be successful with that. So, yeah, that's just all right. So on the next page, on page 239, the chapter briefly outlined different types of validity when you're thinking about formative assessments. Does the assessment construct validity? Does the assessment assess what it says it's going to assess? Kind of like what we just talked about with the letters and sounds. Content validity, does the assessment measure all of what it is meant to assess? And then predictive validity, does the assessment offer any reliable prediction of what the students might do in the future on a different performance task? So again, that was on page 239, if you are following along and marking that up. All right, we're going to do one more individual activity before we are finished with formative assessment. I really felt like the last part of this chapter on pages 240 to 241 were very helpful in thinking about the assessments, the measures that we use, and doing a second look and using your EL lens, right? So they outlined 6 things that I think all teachers, EL teachers, classroom teachers, content teachers should think about with whatever assessments that they're giving. So if you've got English learners, these are some things that we need to keep in mind, that we need to consider when you're trying to make sure that the assessments or the formative tasks that you're doing as part of your instructions are valid and reliable. All right, so I've listed them here. Assessment instructions. Number 2 was the format and use of technology. Number 3 was the linguistic accessibility. And then 4, cultural bias, which we talked a lot about, I think, in our second session. Scoring, and then scaffolds, those helps that we've looked at previously also. So what I'd like for you to do is take maybe 5 minutes and read pages 240, 241, and annotate them in a way that's meaningful to you. We've used that insert method where you underline or put a star or question mark. You can do that if you just want to highlight, if you just want to underline, but I thought it was worth reading those 6 recommendations as we think about designing formative assessments in our English learners. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to do that. All right, great. I think anybody want more time with that if you'd like to? Look like maybe give me a thumbs up if you think you're done. And I'd love to, I know we don't have too large of a group today. Would anyone like to unmute and share something that you thought was super important? I felt like all of these were really important advice and important things to consider. Or you could put something in the chat if you wanted to. The first one, right? The making sure they understand the instructions. I don't think I read this.
I was thinking a cultural bias is sometimes easy to look over because we get hung up on the grammatical part of all of it, that we forget that they don't have the background that we tend to have, especially if they're coming from other countries. They don't know our history. They don't know our, like I said, fairy tales or things like that, that we just take for granted that all kids know, and they just don't.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. That's really important. It reminds me of our discussion last time thinking about a math question with the football field, right? If you don't know a football field, the shape of it, or that it's 100 yards, then you're not gonna be able to show what you know on that math. And I think that is super important. And that kind of ties into maybe 3 and 5 when it talked about the scoring, when you said in your message about not being distracted by other language type errors, but focusing on really what you're assessing. So what goals did you set for this? What were those content goals, and are they doing that? And can you understand, regardless of whether they used all the right pronouns or if their sentences were grammatically correct, right? So definitely thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? I know there are probably any EL teachers on here who spend a lot of time helping students through assessments in the classroom. I know I try to take out a lot of those multiple choice that are worded in a negative. It's just confusing unnecessarily, right? So again, I thought all of those were great things to consider when you're thinking about assessments that you give your students, or if you're helping students through assessments in their content areas. All right, well, it's a nice day out. We're going to close this thing on up. We're going to have one more job together today. So what I'd like for you to do, we're going to start our last breakout session, and I'd like for you to think about a 1 or 2 minute elevator speech. Have you guys heard of that? Where you know, if you meet somebody in an elevator and they ask you a question and you only have a minute to answer, what would you say? And if you were asked, how can we, the classroom teachers or EL teachers or even district leaders, how can we help EL students be successful? How can we unlock their potential? That's what our whole book study was about, unlocking their potential. So I'm going to give you probably maybe just about 15 minutes in your group to think back through what we've done and write a 1 to 2 minute paragraph about what you might tell someone if they were asking you about how to help English learners be successful. On the screen right there with Mr. Elevator Man are the 6 topics that we've talked about throughout the 6 sessions: culturally responsive teaching, scaffolding, academic vocabulary, building background, academic conversations, and then today, formative assessments. So I think Alex is going to put us back in our groups, and like I said, short, what would you tell somebody? How do you unlock potential in our English learners? And then when we get back together, we're gonna maybe have one person in each group read their paragraph. So if you like what somebody else wrote, you can volunteer them to read it for us.
Okay, I am opening breakout rooms.
So is there someone in a group that would like to either read theirs or nominate someone else from their group to share what they would take away or what they might say?
I think I was volunteered for my group. I told them that I was at dance, so if they start playing the tap song, then I'm sorry, but I'm sitting outside of that. I said that I usually have an elevator speech that I give because people ask me what I do for a living. Like, well, you're not a teacher anymore? And I told them I would really like to hear my father explain to people what I do because that would be really funny. So usually what I say is, because I work for our district, and I just explained that regardless of the student's age or how long they've been in our country or what their home language is or how much English they currently know, my job is to work with the student and to work with the teacher to make sure that whatever content they're teaching, that student can also access it and be successful. It just might look different. That's the synopsis. And then Samantha in our group talked about how, like, a lot of these are just best practices for teaching. Like, they could help so many of our students, not just our English learners. And then our group also talked about just making sure that the newcomers feel comfortable. We know that we have to quickly get to teaching them English and teaching them content, but taking a second to make sure that they're comfortable and you learn a little bit of their language and their culture always helps. If I missed anything, they can add it.
No, thank you so much for sharing. I heard lots of the things that we had talked about, being responsive, helping them, the scaffolding, and that vocabulary and just helping newcomers. I love that. Thank you for sharing. There was one other thing that you said that I wanted to touch on and I forgot what it was, but definitely, yeah, awesome. Oh, I know what I was gonna say. When you were talking about how it's just good teaching, a lot of the strategies that we use are gonna help other students in the classroom too. So awesome. Did anyone else get nominated from their group? Would they like to share just a little bit?
I kind of answered the question in a little different sort of context rather than what I do. I was thinking more like how to best help ELs in the classroom. And so I wrote that the most important factor to consider when trying to unlock English learners' potential is a paradigm shift. Instead of seeking the most multi-layered projects, assignments, and assessments, instead we need to look for the most direct, basic linguistic approach to the content. And scaffolding looks different for English learners when you're looking for what is the most streamlined, efficient way to convey this content and the most streamlined and efficient way to receive evidence of learning from the student. So keep it simple, plan backwards from where the student is, analyze what their background is, what their literacy knowledge is, and then build a bridge from where the EL is to the whatever the goal is for that particular project or assignment, and the most simple, clear, direct linguistic path possible.
Wow. That was very beautiful, very well said.
Okay.
I liked the build a bridge. We have to know where our students are to help them. Simple. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think there were 3 groups. If anybody else wants to share. If not, we will. It's hard because I can't see if other friends are looking. All right. Well, again, I hope that that was useful time to kind of recap and reflect on all that we have talked about throughout these sessions. And you know that Alec and I worked together for many years, and this is one of his favorite quotes, and I thought it was a great way to end all of our time. So I think he is actually going to read this, and then we are going to do our survey. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, attention, and I'll let him take over for this.
Thanks, Allison. Yeah, and I have to preface this. This is a little bit of getting on the soapbox, and I'm probably preaching to the choir, but bear with me. Pauline Gibbons is one of my heroes. She says at the end of her book, Scaffolding Language, Scaffolding Learning, she has a little epilogue called A Final Word. And she starts out saying, the potential for learning is not finite or bounded, and the potential for learning in school should not be restricted by a learner's lack of knowledge of the language of instruction, because this would deny EL learners their right to be full members of the school community. They should not be expected to prove themselves linguistically before they can claim this right. The responsibility for their second language development belongs to the school and to their teachers. It is critical that individual teachers remember that they can and do make a difference to children's lives. So I have shared this as a sort of start of the year text with my staff for years. There's two things that I think it echoes beautifully. One is the language of the Lau decision, which is we can't, it's not legal to not support these students. But the second is that last sentence about, all of you who have chosen to spend your afternoon, your summer-like afternoon with us, again, you're the ones who do make differences in children's lives. So thank you for your time.
Awesome. I love that one too. And again, just like Alex said, thank you for spending time devoted to the English learners that you serve. I know that you are making a difference. So thank you for that. And I believe those are our objectives. And then again, thank you for coming. And I just wish you all the best as you continue to serve your English learners. Oh, and then so Alex, I think he's going to put the exit survey in the chat, and then he's probably briefly going to talk about this in just a second. You want me to hold that slide or wait?
Yeah, leave that one up. That's great. I have dropped a link to the survey. It's the last one you need to do for us, but we do really value your feedback. So please just take a moment. We're wrapping up a little bit early, so take one of those early minutes to finish that for us, please. And it is also how we mark attendance. So if you're needing a certificate for being here, that's how we'll get that to you. I do want to announce that the Kentucky Coalition for English Learners has been very happy to partner with Kentucky Department of Education on this book study. And Allison, as one of our members, has been the presenter for this and has done a fabulous job facilitating. We have an annual summer institute. Some of you may have been to it before. We have gone back and forth between in-person and virtual. And this year we are deciding to go back to a virtual format because we think it will reach a wider audience here in the state. And it helps us reduce the cost of the event too. So it's going to be June 4 and 5. It will be via Zoom. That's a Tuesday and Wednesday. It'll run from 9:30 to 4 Eastern time, or if you're in the western half of the state, it's 8:30 to 3. That's three 2-hour sessions each day with a break in the middle of the day to allow people to get some lunch. Registration will be $100, and that includes membership in the Kentucky Coalition for English Learners for the year. We're going to have a variety of national and Kentucky presenters on kind of a wide swath of topics. Featured in that will be some sessions on newcomers, some sessions on MTSS with English learners. The full agenda and more detailed registration information will be available soon. And the easiest way for you to keep track of when that happens is you can go to the site that's linked there. If you follow that, Allison, you have to do that while you're sharing, or I can do it.
Yep, sure thing. I'll try. There we go.
So that link takes you to the coalition's website. And this is the professional learning page. So you can see sessions from past years. If you scroll up to the top again, Allison, I don't know why it's not realizing.
Not
right.
loading, yeah.
Anyway, so we'll get out of that. But you can go to that professional learning page and there will be more information shortly with a complete agenda and registration link. If you've been a member or attended in the past, we will be sending an email out with link information as well. I'm happy to take questions if anybody has them. If not, we'll wrap up.
Can you put the link in the chat, please?
Yeah,
Or the,
I'll do that. Sure.
thank you.
For the web page, correct?
Yes, please, thanks.
And oops, that didn't work. Sorry, let me try one more time. There, that should have worked. And Shelley, that takes you to the professional learning page. If you click on the home page, just for everybody to know, when you're on that professional learning page at the top, if you click on home, there's a place where you can then subscribe to our newsletter if you're not already receiving our newsletter and you want to get that, and then you'll get a notification when we get the agenda and registration links up there. Any questions for me about the Summer Institute or any questions for Allison about our book study? Well, then thank you very much for joining us. I think it's been a great, I'm gonna echo Peyton. It's been an amazing book study. Thank you, Allison, for the presentation. Thanks to Cayman and Brandy and the Kentucky Department of Education for supporting this effort. And I wish all of you a strong close to your school year. It's the time of year where the kids get squirrely, but we're gonna make it through.
That's right. They can do it.